We have been looking at the life of Joseph from the book of Genesis, and we're doing this series we're calling Ordinary Joe, and this is week 5. We are at the point now where it has been 15 years since we met Joseph. Met him as a young boy, a favored son of his father. He had 10 older brothers, and he one night had a prophetic dream that eventually his older brothers would bow down to him. And that dream led to jealousy and anger, and eventually his brothers betrayed him and sold him into slavery, and he has been in Egypt now for these 15 years, and his life has been filled with pain and problems and grief and suffering. But finally, now today in our text, that dream that he had is going to come true. 3 separate times in chapters 42 to 44, the brothers will bow down before Joseph. But it's not going to be this incredible coronation moment. It's actually going to be an incredibly painful moment. And this dream's fulfillment today is going to come with one more challenge in the life of Joseph. It's really a character test in the area of forgiveness. And here's the test that Joseph is going to face today. Will I forgive fully those who wounded me deeply? Everyone has someone they need to forgive or continue to forgive in your life. I'm sure in this room today. Maybe it's an ex. We can start there. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's a parent, a boss, an authority figure. Maybe it's some stranger even that came into your life and wounded you or took something from you that hurt you. Forgiveness is incredibly difficult, but the alternative is actually more than difficult. It's destructive. There was a scientific study from the Emory University School of Medicine that revealed that people who admit to being unforgiving have higher blood pressure and are more likely to die of heart disease and other illnesses. In fact, they found that the negative impact on the heart of unforgiveness and bitterness is actually worse than smoking. So you can be a forgiving person and smoke, or be an unforgiving person who doesn't smoke, and you'd rather be the smoker who forgives, right? We often think that when we hold on to unforgiveness, that I think the reason we do it is because we feel like somehow our holding on to unforgiveness is punishing the other person. It's like I'm keeping this thing over you. And it's somehow that they will be reminded of what they've done to us by us holding on to it. But in reality, it's just hurting ourselves. My favorite analogy of unforgiveness is that when you don't forgive someone and you're holding on to it, it's like eating rat poison and expecting the rat to die. No. The rat needs to eat the poison to die, right? But you're like, I got you now. And that's kind of what happens is we're holding on to this poison inside of us, hoping that us holding on to the poison is going to somehow kill the person or injure the person who forgave us. It doesn't work that way. We're the one who suffers. And yet, even though we might feel it's destructive and scientifically know it's destructive, we all struggle to walk in forgiveness because so many of the wounds in life just feel unforgivable. And so I would guess that in this room today, that we're probably all over the map on our forgiveness journeys. But here are kind of 5 types of people that I identified that might be in this room today. Maybe you can relate to one of these. The first person on their forgiveness journey is what I call the hesitant person. The hesitant person says, I want to forgive, but man, I just can't get the feelings to come. I can't get the courage to do it. I just find myself hesitant every time I think about trying to forgive this person. Or maybe you're the resistant person who's like, I can't forgive. Because if I forgive, I'm going to let them off the hook. And that's not right. That feels unjust. I have to hold on to this. Maybe you're the discouraged person. You went through the motions of forgiving. You had a moment where you kind of felt like, God, I choose to forgive. But all the memories and the feelings keep coming back. And it makes you wonder, did I actually really forgive at all? I hope you're not the dangerous person, but I know I've been in this moment before. A dangerous person refuses to forgive unless that person confesses to it or makes it up. The prayer would be that we would be the blessed person. The blessed person can say, truly, I have learned to practice forgiveness. I have seen the blessing that it brings in my life, and I pray that the next time I'm wounded, I'll have the strength to practice what I've learned. Joseph is going to fight his way through these first 4 reactions to eventually become the 5th person in our text this morning. And we're going to look at the portions of Genesis 42 all the way to 45 and I'm going to ask you to bear with me because the text is a little long, but it's just so compelling. I couldn't figure out what else to cut out except a few sections. So this is God's word starting in Genesis 42. When Jacob, remember this is Joseph's father who's back home. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" He continued, "I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die." Then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt, but Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others because he was afraid that harm might come to him. So Israel's sons were among those who went to buy grain, for there was famine in the land of Canaan also. Now Joseph was governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them. But he pretended to be a stranger, and he spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan," they replied, "to buy food." Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them, and he said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected." No, my lord," they answered. Your servants have just come to buy food. We are all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies." Oh, can you imagine, Joseph, what that must have felt like? Oh, describing yourself as honest men. "No," he said, "you have come to see where our land is unprotected." But they replied, "Your servants were 12 brothers, the son of one man who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more." Joseph said to them, "It is just as I told you. You are spies, and this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your younger brother comes here. Send one of your number to get your brother, and the rest of you will be kept in prison, so that your words may be tested to see if you are telling the truth. And if you are not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies." And he put them all in custody for 3 days. On the third day, Joseph said to them, "Do this, and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison, while the rest of you go and take grain back for your starving households. But you must bring your youngest brother to me, so that your words may be verified and that you may not die." This they proceeded to do, and they said to one another, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen, and that's why this distress has come on us." Reuben replied, "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood." They did not realize, though, that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter. So Joseph is speaking through an interpreter. He's speaking Egyptian to an interpreter who's then speaking in the Hebrew language to these people. So he's not revealing himself as knowing their language, but he's hearing everything they're saying. And Joseph turned away from them and began to weep. Pay attention to that word. We're going to hear that again. But then he came back and he spoke to them again. He had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. And Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain and to put each man's silver back in its sack and to give them provisions for the journey. And this was done for them. They loaded their grain on their donkeys and they left. I'm going to skip ahead a few years later. Their grain runs out and they decide to finally return with Benjamin, since that's what Joseph had told them. So the men took their gifts and they doubled the amount of silver, and Benjamin also, and they hurried back to Egypt and presented themselves to Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, "Take those men to my house, slaughter an animal and prepare a meal. They are to eat with me at noon." The man did as Joseph told him, and he took the men to Joseph's house. Now the men were frightened when they were taken to his house. They thought, "We were brought back here because of the silver that was put back in our sacks the first time. He wants to attack us and overpower us and seize us as slaves and take our donkeys." So they went to Joseph's steward and spoke to him at the entrance of the house. "We beg your pardon, our lord, but we came here the first time to buy food. But at the place where we stopped for the night, we opened our sacks, and each of us found the silver, the exact weight, in the mouth of the sack. So we brought it back with us. We have also brought additional silver with us to buy more food. We don't know who put our silver in our sacks." "It's all right," he said. "Do not be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, has given you treasure in your sacks. I received your silver." Then he brought Simeon out to them. And the steward took the men into Joseph's house and gave them water to wash their feet and provided fodder for their donkeys. And they prepared their gifts for Joseph's arrival at noon because they had heard that they were to eat there. And when Joseph came home, they presented to him the gifts they had brought into the house, and they bowed down before him to the ground. He asked them how they were, and he said, "How is your aged father you told me about? Is he still living?" They replied, "Your servant, our father, is still alive and well." And they bowed down, prostrating themselves before him. And as he looked about and saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, "Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." And deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room and he wept there. After he had washed his face, he came out and controlling himself, and he said, "Serve the food." And they served him by himself, and the brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, for that is detestable to Egyptians. The men had been seated before him in order of their ages, from the firstborn to the youngest, and they looked at each other in astonishment. Can you imagine 11 brothers randomly showing up, and someone says, "Here are your seat assignments," and they sit down and go, "How did he know the order? How did he know our birth order?" Joseph's like just messing with them. When portions were served to them from Joseph's table, Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as anyone else's. So they feasted and drank freely with him. And so the next morning now Joseph sends him home. But again, he has his assistant sneak his silver cup into Benjamin's bag. And then he has them stopped on the way home. And the guard finds his silver cup and arrests Benjamin. The whole thing is just a ruse to keep Benjamin behind. And Joseph says, "The man who was found to have the cup will become my slave. The rest of you go back to your father in peace." Then Judah went up to him and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord. Let me speak a word to you, my lord. Do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself." My lord asked his servants, "Do you have a father or a brother?" And we answered, "We have an aged father, and there is a young son born to him in his old age. His brother is dead, and he is the only one of his mother's sons left, and his father loves him. So then you said to your servants, 'Bring him down, that I may see him for myself.' And we said to my lord, 'The boy cannot leave his father. If he leaves him, his father will die.' But you told your servants, 'Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you will not see my face again.' And when we went back to your servant, my father, we told him what the Lord had said. And our father said, 'Go back and buy a little food.' But we said, 'We can't go back. Only if our youngest brother is with us can we go. We cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us.' Your servant, my father, said, 'You know that my wife bore me 2 sons, and one of them went away from me.' And he said, 'He has surely been torn to pieces, and I've not seen him since. If you take this one from me too, and harm comes to him, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in misery.' So Judah continues, 'So now, if the boy is not with us when I go back to your servant my father, and if my father, whose life is closely bound up with this boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servants will bring the gray head of our father down to the grave in sorrow. Your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father, and I said, if I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you, my father, all of my life. Now then, please let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come to my father." Judah is basically putting all of his life on the line to protect Benjamin. Joseph's like, you tried to kill me. You're the oldest one. You could have protected me. Where were you? Where was all of this protection, big brother, when I was getting thrown in a pit? And now you're basically you're saying, put me in prison, not Benjamin. The emotion of this argument that he's having, he has to listen to, like, who are you? This is what you should have done when I was a kid. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all of his attendants. And he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, Come close to me." And when they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing or reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made him lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. And you shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me. You, your children, your grandchildren, your flocks and your herds, all that you have, and I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all belong to you will become destitute. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about the honor accorded me in Egypt and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly. And then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin embraced him, weeping. And he kissed all of his brothers and wept over them. And afterwards his brothers talked with him. So they went out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, and they told him, Joseph is still alive. In fact, he's ruler of all Egypt. Jacob was stunned. He didn't believe him. But when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when they saw the carts that Joseph had sent to carry back, the spirit of their father Jacob revived, and Israel said, I am convinced my son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. Wow. What a story. "20 years since Joseph was betrayed and sold into slavery. When the brothers first show up, it's so clear Joseph's initial reaction to them is that he has not fully forgiven them. Right? When they appear, he doesn't run to them, he doesn't reveal himself. He remains hidden. He's trying to figure out, how do I respond? What am I going to do in this moment to these men who hurt me so bad? And the human temptation that we all wrestle with is to punish, to get payback, right? To exact some sort of revenge, to cause their pain to somehow match my pain. And Joseph has never had the proximity to do that. And now all of a sudden he actually has the proximity to his brothers to exact some revenge. And it's like he's wrestling with how to respond. Do I forgive them or not? The whole tone of these 3 chapters is Joseph wavering between these two options. Do I punish or do I forgive? In fact, I would love to see kind of a screenwriter or on film, someone try to capture what is the movement, the physical movement in those chapters, because it is a back and forth movement that I think in God's, the way this is written is meant to kind of even convey the internal reality of the back and forth that's going on in Joseph. I mean, just picture this in your mind. The brothers come into the room, Joseph leaves to weep. Then he comes back. Then the brothers are sent to prison. Then 3 days later, they're released from prison. Joseph says, 1 brother can go home and 9 will stay here. And then he says, no. 9 brothers can go home and 1 must stay here. First, he treats them harshly as spies, and then he gives them all this grain and their silver back like they're friends, and he doesn't want their money. They go home to Jacob, but then they come back to Egypt. And they return with Benjamin. They come into Joseph's presence. Joseph has to leave the room again. Simeon is thrown in prison, and then he's released from prison. The brothers are sent home, and then they're come back. I mean, it's this back and forth externally that I think is meant to reveal and draw attention to the inner experience of Joseph. You really can't endure their presence for very long without running out to cry because of how painful it was the last time he saw them. And in his heart, he's just wrestling with, do I punish them or do I forgive them? One of the crazy details of this that I didn't ever catch when I was just reading this devotionally until I studied this passage years ago is that you notice the 3 things that Joseph does to his brothers are basically the 3 things that have happened to him that have been most painful. He basically kidnaps Simeon from the brothers, throws him in jail, and makes the brothers go home. So he detains a brother and says, you're not part of the family anymore. See how that feels. And then, when they come back, he falsely accuses them all of a crime. That's exactly what happened with Potiphar's wife. He's like, you want to know what I've had to go see what this feels like, to be falsely accused of something that you know you didn't do and sent to prison, have to sit in a prison and go, what do we say to defend ourselves? It's almost as if he's like trying to inflict his former pain on them, but realizing it's not making the pain go away. No matter what I do to them to try to make it even, it's not actually helping. It's such a great picture, I think, of the challenge that we have when it comes to pain, and especially the reality that there's no pain like family pain. And there's no one as hard to forgive as family. And Joseph is wrestling with this great problem we all face in our pain is, will I forgive fully those who wounded me deeply? And there's moments where it looks like he's not going to be able to do it. And then finally, after this 18-month inner struggle of punish or pardon, he reveals himself and he makes it clear, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not seeking retribution. I'm going to forgive you. Come, let's hug. And what strikes me so much about Joseph's forgiveness is how clearly it's a decision he makes. It's not an emotion that leads to forgiveness. Every emotion he's had has been an emotion of pain and sadness and regret. That's not what leads you naturally to forgiveness. He makes a decision to forgive. He finds the courage to choose to forgive. And even when he's doing it, he's weeping because of the cost of that forgiveness. Do you know that in all the times that we've studied Joseph, he's been in prison, he's been human trafficked, he's been falsely accused, he's been forgotten about. We've never heard him cry until now. It's as if this is the most painful thing he's ever had to face. Forget all of that. It's facing his brothers back. He's going to cry 6 times in 8 chapters. And that weeping is literally the sound of forgiveness finally being offered. It's the sound of him working through the emotion. It's such a good reminder that forgiveness isn't free. Forgiveness is incredibly costly. It may be free, a free gift to the recipient, but to the person who has to offer forgiveness, they pay a high price to give it. And we hear the sound of that price. I wonder if part of that sadness too is again recognizing that in this moment of forgiveness, there's another dream that he's going to have to let go. For 15 years, I wonder if he was in those prisons thinking, man, if I ever had the chance to get back at my brothers, I would do it. I'm just kind of holding on to this idea that one day I'll get revenge. One day I'll be able to get them. One day they'll get what's coming to them. And now he has the power to do it. He's literally over them in power. They have nothing. He has everything. And he's letting it go. He's letting that dream die. And it feels miserable in the moment, even though he knows it's right. So let's kind of talk about this forgiveness and kind of 3 elements of it that I think then translate into our daily lives, right? Let's first start with kind of a definition of forgiveness that relates to us today. Forgiveness is the decision to release someone from the debt that they incurred when they wounded you. Forgiveness is a transactional word. It's a cancellation of a debt, right? It's a tearing up of a student loan. It's someone having an IOU against you and them eliminating it. When Jesus is dying on the cross, the last words that he says are tetelestai in Greek, or paid in full in English. It was literally the word that they would put on a receipt. When a receipt or like a debt had been canceled, they would stamp on it, paid in full. In fact, a lot of our receipts today, even on it, will have kind of paid in full. And your receipt is the ticket to show that you don't owe a debt for this object, that you've paid it off. And that's what forgiveness is. It's paying off a debt. And when you're sinned against, you lose something. That person incurs a debt. Maybe it's happiness or reputation or peace of mind. But there's an unavoidable sense that you owe me for how you treated me. That wasn't right. And you've incurred a debt, and you have to pay that debt back. And the initial human response is the only way you're going to pay that debt back is if I get even with you and I do the same thing back to you, and then we'll be even. And that's often the fleshly response, the response we often see in the world, that if I could just hurt you or yell at you or make you feel bad or maybe wait and hope that something bad happens to you and then celebrate it, that we'll be even. But living that way does something to us that is so destructive. I mean, it creates this hard heart of self-centeredness and entitlement. And in fact, my desire to repay evil for evil turns me evil. Right? This is what even guys like Gandhi and Martin Luther King, this is what they were all saying about forgiveness, is an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. If we all try to repay evil for evil, we all just become evil in the end. But in forgiveness, the offended party surrenders the right to enforce that justice. They choose not to retaliate. They release someone from the debt. But when we forgive, that debt still remains. You can't just pretend like it didn't happen. So what do we do with that debt? Well, what the person who's forgiving has to do is absorb it into themselves. They experience a level of personal suffering, of voluntary suffering. I will absorb that debt in order to let you off the hook. And so we release that need for retributive justice or for revenge, and instead we embrace the way of God, the way of restorative justice. And that's why no one ever feels like forgiving someone, because we know that to forgive someone is going to be painful. It's going to cost us something. But forgiveness is never a feeling, it's a decision. It's a gift that we give regardless of how we feel. It's a choice. And it's a choice that ends that cycle of revenge and leaves justice openly in the hands of an eternal God. And so the first piece of this definition of forgiveness is to remember that it is a choice we make before we ever feel like making it. The decision, the choice to release someone is the engine of forgiveness. The feelings are the caboose that may come later or may never ever come. So that's our definition, but I think there's two parts of forgiveness that make it so challenging. And so these are the kind of the two pieces that we have to remember when we are choosing to forgive, that there's a crisis and a process. The crisis of forgiveness is this one-time decision that I make. I choose to forgive. It's not an emotion I'm waiting for. It's a decision I make on my own. I choose to cancel your debt. I won't demand payback. I won't seek revenge. And I can do that as one person. Forgiveness only takes one person. Reconciliation takes two, but forgiveness takes one. And so I can make that choice on my own. I don't have to wait for someone to ask for it. I can forgive someone who may not even be alive anymore. But I choose to forgive, even if that person hasn't confessed it, even hasn't asked it. That is in my power. That's the crisis of forgiveness. But it's not that easy. It's not just a one-time crisis and we go, I did it, it's over. It's also an ongoing process that every day going forward, I will choose to treat you as if that offense did not occur. I will live out this ongoing practice, this process of forgiveness. I won't bring it up to you. I'm not going to bring it up to others. I'm not going to bring it up to myself. I'm not going to dwell in it. I'm not going to remind myself of it. I'm not going to think about it. Every time it comes up, I'm going to say to myself, whoa, wait a minute. I know that pain, but remember, I chose to forgive, and now I'm going to walk in the process of forgiveness. And I've had these moments. I've had family members. I've had friends. I've had exes. I've had all sorts of people that I've had to forgive, and I've had the crisis moment, the tearful moment. A lot of times they've been in Sunday services like this, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Lord, it is killing me to hold on to this. I've got to let it go. But I can tell you that crisis moment, as challenging as it is nothing compared to the process that follows, where a week later, it comes back up. You see that person. You remember that person. You're still paying off that debt, and you have to go, whoa. When you fail in the process, go back to the crisis. I chose to forgive that person. Now I'm going to live out today the reality of that. It takes a long time to train yourself to walk out that sort of forgiveness. So that's our definition of forgiveness, the two parts of forgiveness. But here's the most important piece. Here's the actual secret to forgiveness. The only reason that makes forgiveness accessible to us is that my capacity to forgive is in direct proportion to my understanding of how much God has forgiven me. Paul will say later in the New Testament that we are to forgive just as Jesus forgave us. Just as, meaning in the same manner that Jesus forgave us. So let's not leave here without taking a moment to remind ourselves of the manner of Jesus' forgiveness. That each one of us, because of our brokenness and our bent towards selfishness, each one of us has a track record of immoral behavior. The Bible calls that sin. It's a tab that we've racked up. It's a debt that we can't erase. That as we stand before a holy God one day, we will not be on equal terms. That there will be a rap sheet against us because of this bent towards selfishness and pride. And that sin is actually an act of treason against the divine God who created us and who gave us the purpose of imaging him and representing him in the whole world. And the only punishment for divine treason is death. But because of Jesus' great love for us, even though we were sinners, he came to us and he took his place on the cross, our place on the cross, and he dies for us. He voluntarily suffers. He takes on the suffering that we deserved in order to offer forgiveness to us. We owed a debt we could not pay. Jesus pays our debt, one that he did not owe. That's the good news of the gospel. And Jesus does this against a backdrop of every ancient Near East God who believes in retributive justice, an eye for an eye, a tit for tat. Revenge settles the score. You kill my friend, I kill your friend. And there's even systems of legality in the Old Testament that might even sense like, is that who our God is like? And then Jesus comes on and clarifies, go, no. No, that is not what God is like. God is not a God of retribution. He's a God of mercy and of justice. And Jesus says, I'm going to take the suffering into myself in order to settle the score. I'm going to absorb the pain. I'm not going to dish it back out. And that's the only way you restore a relationship. There are no enduring relationships in life without this level of forgiveness. And so no matter what you've done, no matter how many times you've done it, Jesus is offering total and complete forgiveness for any who are just willing to call on his name and receive it and surrender our lives to him. That is the manner in which Jesus has forgiven us, full, complete, ongoing, forever. But it comes with one little caveat, one little expectation that those who receive God's forgiveness through Jesus are called to show it to others. Forgiven people are compelled to forgive people. And so as followers of Jesus, we are compelled to forgive just as Jesus forgave us. Just as he offered forgiveness as a free gift that wasn't deserved, we offer it to others as a free gift that they don't deserve. Just as Jesus offered forgiveness to us before we ever asked, before we were ever even born, before we had ever even sinned, he had already made it clear. We offer it to others even before they asked for it. Just as Jesus forgives us time and time again, we are willing to forgive others if they wound us repeatedly. And so let's just go back to those first 5 people that we talked about and say, how might those 5 people be impacted by this message on forgiveness? This example that Joseph is setting for us, the example that Jesus sets. And if you're in the room this morning and you're the hesitant person, you're thinking, I want to forgive, but I can't get the feelings to come. I can't get the courage to do it. Let me just remind you, forgiveness is not a feeling. Don't wait for the feeling. Feeling may never come. It's a decision. It's a choice that we make. It's an act of our will. The feelings may come later, but probably not for a long time. But you have the power to make the decision to forgive. And time alone will heal nothing. Hesitating and waiting and procrastinating and putting it off and not thinking about it, all that does is let more time for the negative emotions to ferment and to lead to bitterness and entitlement and ultimately to turn you into the evil person that you don't want to be. Today could be the day that you overcome that hesitation and forgive with that choice. Maybe you're the resistant person who thinks, I can't forgive, or I'd be letting him off the hook. Remember, the choice to forgive is not about their health. It's about your health. Forgiving is in your best interest. They hurt you once. The more you hold on to unforgiveness, the longer you're letting them hurt you repeatedly. Don't do that. Don't eat the rat poison thinking they're going to experience death. You're the one who's paying the price for the unforgiveness. That doesn't mean you have to enable them. It doesn't mean you even have to trust them again. You can forgive someone without trusting them or being back reconciled with them. But it's in your best interest to forgive. You can freely give forgiveness and then let trust be slowly gained over time. Those two are not the same thing. It may not even be wise to trust them again, but it is wise for you to forgive them. If you're the discouraged person, you think, man, I went through the motions, I had that crisis moment, I know I forgave, but I just don't ever feel like it. And these memories keep coming back and the feelings keep coming back. And I wonder, did I ever really forgive? Man, when you fail in the process, go back to the crisis. Trust that crisis moment was a mark. But just remember that there's an ongoing process that comes with it. And if you struggle to think, well, maybe I don't know if I had that crisis moment. I think the best test of that is how specific was that moment? Did you name it? Did you actually name and put an experience? Did you just say, oh man, my dad sucked, my mom sucked, I forgive him? That's not meaningful forgiveness. You say, no, this is what you took from me. This is what you did to me, and this was the impact it had. And that was wrong. And I am scarred for that. But I forgive you. Determine who wounded you. Speak out. Write it down if you have to. Spell it out. What did they do? Get specific. That's when you can finally have a crisis moment. If you've been walking around as a dangerous person, refusing to forgive until they confess or make it up, this is often where I get stuck when I get hurt deeply. Just remember that demand for payback, that's not forgiveness. That's just the way of the world. That's just retribution. And I know unforgiveness can feel rewarding, especially as a man. My wife and I talk about this all the time. The emotion I'm most in tune with as a man is anger. A lot of my emotions just become anger because as a man, I feel like anger can be expressed, and there's something powerful about being angry at someone. I feel power. But that sort of prolonged bitterness just makes your heart hard over time. And even if you do finally get payback, even if you get revenge, you become the thing you hate. You become evil. Their evil turned you evil. And that's how evil perpetuates. The only way to defeat evil is if one person stops the cycle, absorbs the blow, and chooses to forgive. And that's how Jesus reconciled the whole world. I'll invite the band up as we just look at finally the prayer that we all want is to be the blessed person. The blessed person who has learned to practice forgiveness and experience it as a blessing. Man, if that's who you are, if you're hearing this message and going like, yeah, this is hard, but man, I can tell you, he's right. He's right. Let me encourage you, when you're ready and when it's appropriate, tell your story. Tell it to as many people as you can. Be as transparent, be as vulnerable as appropriate. Give others the courage to know that there are people who are walking in forgiveness and it is impacting their lives. The community of Jesus needs as many stories of forgiveness as we can have to encourage us all to walk in that. And the world around us that is dying under the oppression of unforgiveness and demanding retribution, they need to know that there is a better way to be human and that you can forgive and that you can encounter the forgiveness of God in a way that inspires you and empowers you to forgive others. So let your story inspire not just those in this community, but those outside the world, and point them to Jesus. Let's just take this moment even now, as we do each week, in kind of silence. Before we even say to Jesus, who do I need to forgive? Or bring someone to my mind, or how am I doing? Just to say, no, Jesus, just remind me today of the depth and breadth and power of your forgiveness for us. Reassure me right now that I am fully forgiven, that I have no need to fear rejection, that I am known and loved and accepted in your eyes because of the suffering that you took upon that cross. Make that so real to me that I couldn't possibly not extend that to someone else. Father, in this moment right now, I just pray you'd speak to us. Soften our hearts. Help us to truly understand the depth of your sacrifice, that we might become little Christs in this world, offering that same forgiveness to others, we pray.